Okay, so let's get into the performance characteristics of these advanced fuses. And throughout this, I'll be referring to the original black fuses, as well as the differences when winging compared to prone foiling. So let's start off with maneuverability, because really that's what these advanced fuses are all about. They give a lovely surfy feel to literally every foil that you use them with. It's almost like they change the performance characteristics. And again, if you like a surfy feel, and who doesn't, then you're going to love them. Clearly, the characteristics of this surfy maneuverability type feel increases as you go down in size from ultra to crazy to silly short, as do all of the other changing characteristics which I'll be going through. So maneuverability, it loosens up the roll axis and the yaw axis. It makes it much easier to initiate turns, much easier to do quicker or tighter turns. Looser, yes, but with no loss of control. And I cannot get this across clearly, and hopefully I'm going to be really clear about this point, that there is no loss of control. As long as your skill level is up to being able to turn that fast and tight, then the fuses will let you do that with the amount of control that it needs. So if you're off balance and you're not going to make the turn. It's as simple as that. But if you can do it, yes, it will allow you to do it. Now, a little caveat here, or disclaimer, I've only really tested these advanced fuses with the art range of foils. And they are fast foils. They need to be kept going quite fast. And when we get into the pumping, that's really important. But also in terms of lift, because I've noticed that the advanced fuses give a much more gentle initial lift, yet they don't change the lift. They don't reduce the lift overall. So you still get that benefit of all the lift that any foil you use them with has got, but they don't overfoil. This is the amazing thing. And as you go shorter, down to the silly short advanced fuse, that characteristic is one of the nicest characteristics, just as good as the maneuverability from my liking, because if you've got a gentler initial lift or more progressive initial lift, then it makes the takeoffs for prone foiling much easier to control. There's no overfoiling when you're on a wave or when you're carving hard. It's absolutely incredible how there have been times when I've been on the Art 999 and the 1099, both for proning, even for wake foiling, and carving it up when downwinding. There have been times when I've felt like I'm in danger of being overfoiled, and yeah, as long as you put enough pressure on your front foot, then you can deal with it. But with the silly short, there is none of that overfoiled feeling, and you can just do what you want to do without any worries whatsoever. It's absolutely beautiful, that feeling. It really is lovely. So I've got to say, though, that there is one small area where that becomes a disadvantage, and that is only when you're winging and underpowered. But again, it's probably only on these super high aspect art foils, because they need a little bit more speed than most foils to take off and get on foil. Then that sort of reduction in initial lift becomes a disadvantage, but only when you're underpowered. And again, I'm pretty sure it'll only be on those high aspect foils. Okay, so that's maneuverability and lift. Let's talk about pitch control, or I should say pitch sensitivity. And again, there's disadvantages and advantages, because yes, they are definitely more pitch sensitive, especially as you go down in size and in length of the fuse. That becomes much more noticeable. And if you jump on a silly short fuse for the first time, there are times when it'll be like a bucking bronco and you'll breach, especially if you're a beginner and you're not used to being quite so controlled with with the pitch. But the good news is that you get used to that very, very quickly, and after a while, it actually becomes an advantage for a lot of situations, like when you're when you're on the wave face. I don't know, it's just being able to control the pitch that much more fluidly, especially at speed. It's a real advantage. I would say that the only time it's a disadvantage is when you're hacking upwind, winging, say after a long downwind run, flagging out the wing. You then got to go all the way back upwind, and you're going against the swell. It's choppy sea state, maybe gusty conditions. If you're on the silly shore, it does become quite challenging, not to do that whole buckaroo type, up and down, maybe get bucked off, breaching or whatever. As long as you're on it, you can deal with it. It's quite tiring. You've got to be on it the whole time. With the advanced ultra short, though, it's not an issue at all. It's really nice and relaxing going upwind. I don't feel that the pitch sensitivity is an issue with the ultra short, but yes, the silly short, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do a long downwind run, because I know it's going to be, not relaxing when I come back upwind, I'll use the advanced ultra short. But for literally everything else, I'll be on the silly short. And I'm not an expert foiler. I'd consider myself to be a sound intermediate. But if I can get used to the pitch control of the silly short, then trust me, everybody, apart from maybe complete beginners, it won't take you long to get used to it. Okay, so that's pitch control. Pumping, yes, this is the biggie. Does it help? Does it hinder? How does it affect pumping? Well, again, because I've only really used these advanced fuses a lot with the art foils, and the art foils are high aspect and they like to be kept fast. They've got a higher stall speed than most foils. Then I think the advanced fuses are a big advantage for pumping them. I really do, in two ways. For a start, because the mast is further forward, then every time you go up at that up and down movement when you do a pump, you're changing the angle of attack more than you would if you're on the equivalent size for the normal black fuses, because the pivot point is closer to the foil. Now, whether you're on the black or the advanced fuses, the shorter you go, this will also have an effect. And to just quickly give you a little bit of a background on this, when I first started dock starting smaller and smaller foils, I got a really good technique tip from listening to Kane de Wilde on one of the Progression Project podcasts, when Kane was saying that the pumping technique for smaller foils is actually better with a shorter fuselage, because you get more acceleration, because every time you go up down, you're changing the angle of attack more than with a longer fuse. So with that increased angle of attack every time you go up and down for each pump, you're actually getting more acceleration per pump. And that means that the advanced fuses are easy to keep the speed up because of that extra acceleration through each pump. And because the art foils they're much easier to pump when you keep their speed up, then the advanced fuses obviously help you to pump the art foils. It's easier to keep above the stall speed, easier to pump. Easier all round, really, from the point of view of pumping. But what really took me by surprise is that I can now actually pump myself out of a hole with the silly short fuse 3 times now. I've touched the board down so badly, yet managed to pump my way out of it. I've never been able to do that with the normal black fuses. And my theory anyway is that it's because of this. The change in angle of attack is greater with the advanced fuses, especially the shorter fuses for each pump. So that helps you to be able to do that. I really do think that pumping is actually easier for those reasons. But having said that, I do think that your skill level has to be good enough to be able to do that, because with the advanced fuses, especially as you go shorter sizes, you make a mistake, and that mistake is a bigger deal. You know, it's just the way that it is with any fuselage, I think. Like the smaller the rear stab you're pumping with, they're faster, therefore it's easy to keep your speed going, but you make a mistake and you pay for it. So swings and roundabouts. Okay, so I think I've dealt with maneuverability, lift, pitch control, pumping. How loose is too loose? How much should which advanced fuse should you go for? Well, that's totally up to the individual. I would never recommend a beginner to go straight onto the silly short. That would be too big a jump. But if your skill level is reasonable, I do think that even if to begin with you find it a little bit of a handful, you'd be surprised how quickly you can get used to it. And again, I think from what I've said, I think there are a lot more positives about these advanced fuses than people think, and some of the negatives might not actually be negatives in certain situations. So I've tried to be honest about where the negatives are. But if you've got any questions about that or anything else, then please do fire my way and I'll do my best to answer.